"Officer, are you seeing this?" A voice like nails on a chalkboard sliced through the humid evening air. It's a rave. In his backyard." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my beer, the condensation on the bottle cool against my palm. I watched the kaleidoscopic lights, pulsing blues, shifting greens, strobing reds, dance across the utterly bewildered face of Officer Miller. His name tag glinted in a flash of magenta. He looked from the roaring spectacle in my yard to the frantic woman standing on the adjacent deck in a fluffy pink bathrobe, and then back again. His expression was one of profound, soul-deep exhaustion. "Actually, officer," I said, offering a neighborly smile that didn't quite reach my eyes, "it's just a little water feature for ambiance. Behind me, my creation, my magnum opus, my glorious 20-foot monument to spite, thundered its magnificent retort, drowning out whatever Carol was about to shriek next. It was perfect. But it hadn't started here, with a light show that would make a Vegas casino blush. Oh no. It started much, much smaller. It started with a sound no louder than a squirrel taking a leak. 3 months earlier, my life was a symphony of beige. And I loved it. I'm Mark, and I work in IT. My job, which I've been doing from home since before it was cool, involves telling people to turn things off and on again. It's not exciting, but it pays the mortgage on my slice of suburban paradise. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch house in a neighborhood where the biggest controversy was usually whose turn it was to host the annual chili cook-off. My domain was my backyard. I wasn't a sports guy or a car guy. I was a lawn guy. My grass was a lush, uniform carpet of green. My hedges were sculpted with geometric precision. My prize-winning roses were the envy of the cul-de-sac. This half-acre was my sanctuary, my escape from the endless litany of password resets and network errors. It was a place of quiet, predictable order. And the crowning jewel of that order was the fountain of Zen. I'd bought it from Home Depot on a whim. It was a modest 3-tiered ceramic thing, glazed in a pleasant seafoam green. I placed it in the center of a small rock garden I'd built myself, surrounded by Japanese maples and hostas. It took about 5 gallons of distilled water and a small submersible pump that hummed with the quiet efficiency of a well-behaved appliance. The water would bubble up from the top, trickle down each tier, and land in the basin with a gentle, melodic plink-plunk tinkle. That was it. That was the sound. It was the auditory equivalent of a chamomile tea. It was just enough to mask the distant hum of the I-95 and attract the occasional sparrow looking for a bath. Lying in my hammock on a Saturday afternoon, a cold drink in hand, listening to that gentle sound. That was my nirvana. It was the sound of everything being right with the world. Of course, in any paradise, there's always a snake. In my case, the snake wore a visor and power-walked at 6 a.m. sharp. Her name was Carol. Carol lived in the identical ranch house to my left. Our property line was demarcated by a row of perfectly pleasant azalea bushes. At least, they were perfectly pleasant on my side. On hers, I suspect they lived in a state of constant, low-grade terror. Carol was the unofficial warden of our cul-de-sac. She was the reason a passive-aggressive note about properly sorted recyclables once appeared on everyone's blue bin. She was the one who measured, with a literal tape measure, the distance of my garbage cans from the curb. They were, she'd informed me with a grim nod, 3 inches too far into the street. My interactions with her were blessedly few and always brief, a tight-lipped nod as I got the mail. A silent, judgmental stare as I mowed a strip of lawn she apparently felt was 1/8 of an inch too high. She was a background character, a piece of suburban set dressing I could easily ignore. Or so I thought. I should have known the fountain of Zen would upset the delicate, miserable balance of her universe. It was new. It was different. It made a sound. It was, in short, a declaration of chaos in her world of rigid, joyless order. I just didn't realize that my gentle plink-plonk tinkle would be the gunshot that started a war. A very, very loud war. I remember the day it all began. I was out back, weeding my petunias, feeling a sense of deep, uncomplicated contentment. The sun was warm, a gentle breeze was blowing, and the fountain was tinkling away. It was a perfect suburban afternoon. I heard a sharp ahem from the property line. I looked up. There she was. Carol, the cul-de-sac sentinel, standing with her hands on her hips, her face pinched into an expression of profound grievance. She was staring at my fountain like it had just insulted her mother. "Can I help you, Carol?" I asked, wiping sweat from my brow. "That," she said, pointing a rigid, accusatory finger at the fountain. "That thing." "It's a fountain," I replied, a little confused. "It fountains." "The noise," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were discussing state secrets. "It's incessant." I blinked. I could literally hear a bee buzzing on a nearby rosebush more clearly than the fountain. "The tinkling?" "It's a high-frequency irritant," she declared, puffing out her chest. "It's completely disrupting my peace and quiet." I looked from her dead serious face to my tiny, inoffensive fountain, and back again. A part of me wanted to laugh. This had to be a joke. A really, really weird joke. But as I looked at the utter lack of humor in her eyes, I felt a small, cold stone of dread settle in my stomach. This was not a joke. For Carol, this was war. My first instinct was to handle this like a rational adult. That was my first mistake. Dealing with Carol, I would soon learn, was like trying to play chess with a pigeon. It knocks over all the pieces, poops on the board, and then struts around like it won. "Carol, I can barely hear it from here," I said, gesturing to the 10 feet of pristine lawn between us. "It's really not that loud." "That's what you think?" she shot back, her eyes narrowing. She fumbled in the pocket of her track pants and produced her smartphone. With a few furious taps, she pulled up an app. "This is a professional-grade decibel meter." It looked like a free app with pop-up ads for mobile games. She held the phone aloft, pointing its microphone towards the fountain like a divining rod seeking out evil spirits. "You see?" she screeched, shoving the phone's screen towards my face. A little needle was twitching in the green zone, somewhere between quiet library and normal conversation. "It's registering a persistent, ambient auditory disturbance. It's a violation." "A violation of what, exactly? The laws of physics?" My sarcasm was wasted on her. "Of my right to tranquility," she huffed. "It's giving my cats anxiety." I glanced over at her house. Through the sliding glass door, I could see one of her cats, a fluffy Persian blissfully asleep in a patch of sun, looking about as anxious as a coma patient. This was the point where a normal person might have told Carol to go pound sand. But I was still operating under the delusion that I lived in a society of reasonable people. I wanted to be a good neighbor. "Okay, look," I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "How about this? I'll put the pump on a timer. I'll have it shut off at 9 p.m. every night. Total silence after that. Deal?" She considered this, pursing her lips. "Fine," she finally conceded, as if I had just negotiated the surrender of a hostile nation. "But if I hear one tinkle after 9, I'm calling the association." She spun on her heel and marched back to her house. I spent $20 on an outdoor smart plug and dutifully set the schedule. 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 12 hours of gentle, anxiety-inducing tinkling. I figured that was the end of it. Peace in our time. I was wrong. So wrong. 2 days later, she was back. It was a Saturday. I was on my deck trying to read a book. "Mark?" I lowered my book. She was standing at the property line again, her arms crossed. "Carol? Cat still anxious?" "It's the daytime noise now," she announced. "I'm trying to do my mindful meditation, and all I can hear is that incessant dripping. It's like a leaky faucet in my brain." "It's a fountain," I said, my patience starting to fray. "Dripping is kind of its whole thing. We talked about this." "The agreement was for nighttime silence," she said, wagging a finger. "It doesn't address the auditory assault I'm forced to endure during daylight hours. It's completely unacceptable." "So you don't want it on at night, and you don't want it on during the day," I clarified. "When exactly would be a good time for the fountain to perform its primary function of fountaining?" "That's for you to figure out," she sniffed, before turning and leaving me sputtering in her wake. The next day I found a letter in my mailbox. It was in a crisp white envelope with my address typed in a severe-looking Times New Roman font. It had the weight of official correspondence. My heart skipped a beat. Had she actually complained to the HOA? I tore it open. The letterhead read, "Office of Neighborhood Compliance and Aesthetics." The address was hers. It was a letter from Carol, disguised as a formal notice. It read, "To Mark Peterson, resident, 112 Oak Street, from the Concerned Homeowners Committee for Tranquility. Date, September 5th, 2025. Official notice of nuisance violation. Dear Mr. Peterson, it has come to our attention that a significant noise pollutant has been activated on your property. This device, hereafter referred to as the fountain, is in direct violation of established community standards for peace and quiet. As per the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the Oakwood Homeowners Association, Bylaw 7, Section C, Paragraph 4, Nuisance Abatement, any persistent and disruptive element is subject to immediate review and sanction. The fountain's constant, high-frequency water noise has been determined to be a significant detriment to the quality of life of your immediate neighbors. It interferes with meditation, feline psychological well-being, and general daytime serenity. You are hereby instructed to cease and desist all fountain-related auditory output immediately. Failure to comply will result in further action being taken, including, but not limited to, formal complaints filed with the HOA board and local municipal authorities. Sincerely, Carol Jensen, Chairwoman Concerned Homeowners Committee for Tranquility. I stared at the letter. Chairwoman? Committee? It was a committee of one, her. I actually went and looked up the bylaw she cited. It was about leaving trash cans out for more than 24 hours. That was it. The line had been crossed. The good neighbor ship had sailed, hit an iceberg of crazy, and sunk to the bottom of the sea. I marched out my back door, unplugged the timer from the smart plug, and plugged the fountain directly into the wall. The gentle plink-plunk tinkle resumed, a sweet sound of defiance. I stood there, arms crossed, staring at her house. An hour later, I saw her through the window, standing on her lawn, phone pressed to her ear, a grimly satisfied look on her face. "Yes," I could faintly hear her say. "I'd like to report a disturbance, a noise disturbance." A knock on the front door 20 minutes later confirmed my suspicions. I peered through the peephole to see 2 police officers standing on my porch. They did not look thrilled to be there. I took a deep breath, plastered on my best "who me" expression, and opened the door. The older one, whose name tag read Miller, looked like he'd been a cop since the invention of donuts. His face was a roadmap of weary sighs and pointless domestic dispute calls. The younger one, Sanchez, had a bright, eager look that was rapidly fading as he soaked in the sheer suburban absurdity of his current assignment. "Mark Peterson?" Miller asked, his voice flat. That's me. Everything okay, officers? Sir, we received a call about a noise complaint at this address, Miller said, consulting his notepad with an air of profound reluctance. Something about a fountain? I had to give him credit for saying it with a straight face. The Fountain of Zen, yes, I said with a solemn nod. The one that sounds like a squirrel taking a leak. It's a real menace to society. Please, come in. Or out, rather. The scene of the crime is in the backyard. I saw Sanchez cough into his fist, his shoulders shaking slightly. Miller shot him a look that could curdle milk. I led them through the side gate into my pristine backyard. The fountain was tinkling away, the sound barely audible over the chirping of a nearby cricket. The two officers stood there for a solid 10 seconds, just listening. Miller's expression didn't change. Sanchez looked around, as if expecting a giant speaker to be hidden in the bushes. "That's it?" Sanchez finally asked, pointing at the small ceramic structure. "That's the noise." "That's the auditory assault, yes," I confirmed. "I believe the complainant's cats are deeply traumatized." Miller let out a long, slow sigh that seemed to carry the weight of every frivolous 911 call ever made. "Sir, your neighbor, Miss Jensen, reported a severe disturbance." "She has very sensitive hearing," I offered, "and very anxious cats." "Look, Mr. Peterson," Miller said, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was a gesture I was becoming intimately familiar with. "Technically, we have to respond to the call, but this is not a police matter. There's no ordinance against a garden fountain. My advice? Just try to get along with your neighbor." His tone made it perfectly clear that he knew this was impossible. "Have a good night, sir." They turned and left, Sanchez still trying valiantly to maintain a professional demeanor. As they walked away, I heard him mutter to his partner, "A fountain? Seriously?" I felt a surge of victory. The law was on my side. But my triumph was short-lived. 2 days later, a real envelope from the Oakwood Homeowners Association arrived. Inside was a crisp, impersonal form letter. It was a notice of violation. Under the checklist of common infractions like unkempt lawn and improperly stored vehicle, a box was checked next to other. In the blank space provided, scrawled in angry block letters, were the words, "Loud Fountain." Attached was a fine for $50. I was furious. She'd actually done it. She'd weaponized the HOA, that faceless cabal of retirees and busybodies who governed our lives with an iron fist of beige paint swatches and lawn height regulations. I called the HOA management company. The woman on the phone sounded about as interested as a sloth on tranquilizers. "Yes, we received a formal complaint from a neighbor, with a date-stamped recording," she droned. "A recording? Of what? The sound of water gently trickling? Are you people serious?" "Our policy is to issue a warning and a fine upon the first formal complaint, sir. If the issue is not resolved, further fines will be levied." I hung up the phone, my blood boiling. I was being fined for enjoying my own backyard. All because of one miserable woman and her allegedly anxious cats. Reason had failed. Diplomacy had failed. The law, in the form of the HOA, was being twisted against me. I felt trapped, cornered by sheer unadulterated pettiness. That night, I sat in my home office, stewing. I paid the ridiculous $50 fine online, my fingers stabbing at the keyboard. I felt defeated. I stared blankly at my computer screen, mindlessly scrolling through some news aggregator. An ad popped up on the side of the page. It was for a heavy-duty pond liner. I barely noticed it, but I must have clicked on it because the next ad was for submersible pond pumps. Then one for decorative river stones. I went down a rabbit hole of backyard landscaping, I clicked on links for ponds, then koi ponds, then water features, and then I saw it. It was on a high-end landscape architect's website. It wasn't a fountain, it was a waterfall. A massive, glorious structure of stone and boulders, with water cascading down multiple levels into a crystal-clear pool. It was surrounded by lush ferns and lit with dramatic, artfully placed spotlights. It was powerful. It was beautiful. It was loud. I stared at the picture. I looked out my office window, across the dark lawn, at Carol's house. All her lights were off, her house a dark lump of smug, silent victory. An idea began to form in my mind. It was a terrible, wonderful, completely unhinged idea. It started as a little spark of malicious compliance, and in the span of 30 seconds, erupted into a raging inferno of creative revenge. My internal monologue kicked into overdrive. She thinks that's loud? That little tinkle? She doesn't like the gentle sound of water? Fine. I'll give her water. I'll give her the unceasing roar of the Amazon. I'll give her the majestic thunder of Niagara Falls right outside her bedroom window. She wants to complain about a high-frequency irritant? I will give her a full-spectrum, bass-thumping, house-shaking symphony of aquatic power. She weaponized the HOA? I'll weaponize hydrology. I'll build something so big, so bold, so completely and utterly by-the-book legal that it will drive her absolutely, certifiably insane. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, manic grin spreading across my face. The plan was born. Operation Aqueous Annihilation was a go. The first step in any brilliant, ill-advised plan is to find someone just as crazy as you are to help build it. My Google search for landscaping contractors yielded a list of companies with names like Serene Gardens and Prestige Patios. I called 2 of them. The first was a guy named Charles, who spoke in hushed, reverent tones about bringing the landscape's inner truth to life. "So here's the thing, Charles," I said over the phone. "I want to build a waterfall, a big one, against my back fence, maybe 20 feet high." There was a long, pained silence on the other end. "Sir," he finally said, his voice dripping with condescension, "a feature of that magnitude would completely disrupt the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. We specialize in subtle organic integrations." "I'm looking for something a little less subtle," I said. "More disharmonious." He politely declined the job. The second company sent out a young woman named Brittany, who showed me a portfolio of tasteful, understated Zen gardens. "This is lovely," I said, pointing to a photo of a small bamboo spout trickling into a stone basin. "Now imagine that, but about 400 times bigger and louder." She stared at me, her smile frozen in place. "Our design philosophy is centered around tranquility and minimalism." "My design philosophy is centered around getting back at a woman named Carol," I explained. "She also declined the job." I was starting to lose hope. Maybe my dream was too big, too petty for the world of professional landscaping. I was scrolling to the 3rd page of Google search results, the digital equivalent of the bad part of town, when I saw it. A website that looked like it was designed in 1998. The business was called Gus's Guts and Glory Landscaping. The tagline was, "If you can dream it, we can dig it." I called the number. A gravelly voice answered on the 2nd ring. "Gus." "Hi, Gus. My name is Mark. I have a unique project." An hour later, a rusty Ford F-150 pulled up to my curb. A man who was built like a retired refrigerator hopped out. He was in his late 50s, with a magnificent beer belly, a sun-weathered face, and a t-shirt that said, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right." This was Gus. I led him to the backyard. I explained the situation: the fountain, Carol, the cats, the cops, the HOA. As I spoke, a slow grin spread across his face, revealing a missing incisor. So, to recap, I finished, pointing to the back fence, the one directly facing Carol's house. I want to build a waterfall, a big one, like 20 feet. Gus took a long drag from a cherry-flavored vape, the smoke mingling with the scent of my prize-winning roses. He looked at the fence. He looked at Carol's house. He looked at me. 20 feet? He rumbled. In this neighborhood, why? My neighbor reported my tiny fountain was too loud, I said, the words feeling more ridiculous every time I said them. Gus let out a bark of a laugh that startled a nearby robin. She did she? He walked over to the fence, squinting at the side of Carol's house, a general sizing up his field of battle. You know what a project like that needs? A lot of rocks? I ventured. RGB lighting, he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Submersible, programmable, color-changing LEDs, the whole shebang. If you're gonna poke the bear, you might as well poke it with a rainbow-colored stick. I had found my co-conspirator. Gus, I said, sticking out my hand, you're hired. I'll do it for half price, he said, shaking my hand with a grip that could crush coconuts. No, wait, full price, and a bonus. This ain't work. This is art. The next week was a blur of planning. Gus and I sat at my dining room table, surrounded by sketches and blueprints. He was a savant of spiteful construction. We designed a 20-foot-tall behemoth, engineered with a series of stepped ledges and deep pools to maximize the sound of crashing water. We picked out a pump so powerful it was typically used for commercial fountains in shopping malls. Then came the permit process. I expected a bureaucratic nightmare, a wall of red tape. Instead, I found the city's greatest weakness: utter, soul-crushing apathy. I went down to the city planning office and got a woman named Brenda who looked like she'd been personally bored by every citizen in the county for the last 30 years. I'd like a permit for a backyard water feature, I said, sliding Gus's professional-looking blueprints across the counter. Brenda chewed her gum with heroic slowness. She glanced at the plans. Height? 20 feet, I said. She didn't even blink. Is it a habitable structure? No, Brenda, it's for water to fall down. Pond depth? About 3.5 feet at the deepest. She stamped 3 forms without looking up. That'll be $200. Stay 5 feet from the property line. Don't block any utility easements. Next. I walked out into the sunlight, permitted in hand, feeling like I'd just gotten away with robbing a bank. It was all legal, all above board. The city had, in its infinite bureaucratic indifference, just rubber-stamped my declaration of war. Construction began the following Monday. At 8 a.m. sharp, a backhoe rumbled down our quiet suburban street and parked in front of my house. Carol, who was out for her morning power walk, stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth falling open. I gave her a cheerful little wave from my porch. Her face went from shock to suspicion to pure, unadulterated rage. The next few weeks were a symphony of glorious, legitimate noise. The roar of the backhoe digging the basin, the beep-beep-beep of the flatbed truck delivering pallets of massive Pennsylvania fieldstone, the whine of angle grinders as Gus and his crew shaped the rocks. Carol was losing her mind. Every single day she was out there, filming us with her phone from her deck. She called the city inspector so many times that he eventually just started sending her straight to voicemail. His name was Dave, and after his 3rd mandatory visit, he and Gus were on a first-name basis. She says you're building an illegal retaining wall, Gus, Dave would say, sighing as he looked at the official stamped permit. Nope, just a decorative water feature, Dave, Gus would bellow back, slapping him on the back. Want a coffee? Gus was a master troll. He knew Carol was watching their every move, so he put on a show. He started playing classic rock on a massive boombox, AC/DC, Guns N' Roses, Led Zeppelin, for morale, he'd explained to me with a wink. When Carol came out to scream at them about the noise pollution, Gus would just turn the music up and yell, "Sorry, ma'am, can't hear you over the sound of progress." The neighborhood was abuzz. My immediate neighbors on the other side, a young couple named Tim and Sarah, would bring Gus's crew lemonade. They'd suffered through their own run-in with Carol over the color of their mailbox. It was eggshell, not the HOA-approved ivory. They were my silent allies. Mr. Henderson, the elderly man across the street, would sit on his porch for hours, just watching the construction with a quiet, knowing smile, like he was watching the finale of his favorite TV show. The structure grew day by day. A mountain of stone was rising in my backyard. It was bigger and more imposing than I had even imagined. It was a monster, my monster. And soon, it would be ready to roar. The final day of construction was a Thursday. Gus's crew installed the massive pump, ran the plumbing, and painstakingly wired up the submersible RGB LED lights. They filled the basin with water from a hose, a process that took nearly 6 hours. By the time they packed up their tools and left, the sun was beginning to set, and my backyard was home to a silent, sleeping giant made of stone. "She's all yours, boss," Gus said, clapping me on the shoulder. He handed me his phone, which had the control app for the lights and pump already installed. "The big red button on the screen starts the pump. The color wheel is for the fun part. Have a blast." The premiere was set for Friday night. I figured it was an event worth celebrating. I invited Gus and his wife, as well as Tim and Sarah from next door. The official occasion was a backyard warming BBQ. The unofficial occasion was, let's see how fast we can make Carol's head explode. The air was thick with anticipation. I grilled burgers and hot dogs. We drank beer. We made small talk. But all of us kept glancing at the colossal stone structure that loomed over the fence, dark and silent in the twilight. Across the yard we could see the light on in Carol's kitchen. The trap was set. The audience was in place. As the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, I decided it was time. "All right, everyone," I announced, raising my beer bottle. "Thank you for coming to the christening of my new centerpiece." Tim and Sarah cheered. Gus let out a hearty, "Woo!" I pulled out my phone and opened the app Gus had installed. My thumb hovered over the big red button, labeled Pump On Off. "I'd like to dedicate this piece to my neighbor, Carol," I said with mock solemnity, "for her unwavering commitment to neighborhood tranquility. This is for her, for peace, for quiet, for ambiance." I tapped the screen. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a low rumble started. A deep hum that you could feel in your chest. It was the sound of the 1.5 horsepower pump, hidden in its housing, waking from its slumber. Another second passed, and then came the water. It wasn't a trickle. It was a release. A torrent of water surged from the hidden outlet at the very top of the 20-foot structure. It hit the first stone ledge with a sound like a thunderclap, exploding into a shower of white foam. Then it cascaded down, level by level, a roaring, churning, relentless avalanche of water, crashing and splashing and filling the air with a deafening, magnificent roar. It was glorious. It wasn't annoying noise. It was a powerful, primal sound, like standing next to a real waterfall in the middle of a national park. The air filled with a cool, misty spray. We all just stood there for a moment, mesmerized, mouths agape. "Okay," I said, my voice trembling with adrenaline. "Phase 2. I moved my thumb to the color wheel on the app. I selected a deep, majestic blue. Instantly, the entire waterfall was bathed in an ethereal blue light, the churning water glowing from within. It looked like something out of a fantasy movie. I switched it to a lush jungle green, then a fiery volcanic red. "Now for the real stuff," Gus said, grinning. I swiped over to the pre-programmed settings. I tapped the one labeled Rainbow Cycle. The lights began a slow, mesmerizing fade from one color to the next, turning the roaring waterfall into a flowing river of liquid light. It illuminated my entire backyard, the side of my house, and, most importantly, the entire back of Carol's house and a good portion of her yard. From next door, we heard a shriek. Not a yell of anger, but a genuine horror movie shriek of disbelief. The light in her kitchen went out, and a moment later, her deck light flicked on. The sliding door flew open, and she stormed out, wearing a fluffy pink bathrobe, her phone already in her hand. She just stood there, staring, her face a perfect mask of apoplectic rage, bathed in the shifting colors of my masterpiece. Of course, she called the cops. We knew she would. We were timing it. 12 minutes later, the familiar flash of red and blue lights pulsed down our quiet street. And walking up my driveway were two deeply familiar figures, Officer Miller and Officer Sanchez. Miller stopped at the gate to my backyard and just stared. His jaw, for the first time since I'd met him, was slack. Sanchez was right behind him, and his eyes went wide. He looked from the waterfall to me, then back to the waterfall, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across his face. Carol was on her deck, screeching, "Officer, are you seeing this? I told you, he's unhinged. It's a rave in his backyard." I walked over to the officers, holding a fresh beer. "Evening, gentlemen," I said calmly. "Just a little water feature, for ambiance. Can I get you anything?" Miller finally found his voice. "Peterson. What in the hell is that?" "It's a waterfall," I said, handing him a plastic-sleeved document from my back pocket. "Fully permitted. City signed off on it Tuesday." Miller took the permit and shone his flashlight on it. He read it, then read it again, as if the words couldn't possibly be real. Sanchez, meanwhile, was walking slowly towards the waterfall, a look of pure, unadulterated awe on his face. He was a kid at Disneyland. "This is legal?" Miller asked, sounding personally offended by the universe. "According to Brenda at the planning office, yes," I confirmed. Carol was still yelling, "It's the noise! The noise is deafening! It's a violation!" Miller trudged over to the property line, pulled out his own decibel meter, a much more official-looking one than Carol's app, and took a reading. He looked at it, shook his head, and walked back over to me. "Well," he said, the word heavy with defeat, "it's loud as hell, but it's a constant white noise. There's no ordinance against this specific type of sound, and at this distance from her property, you're technically within the legal limit for residential zones." He turned to Carol. "Ma'am, it's a waterfall. He has a permit. It's technically legal. There is nothing we can do." I looked over at Officer Sanchez. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He had his hand over his mouth, his entire body shaking with suppressed laughter. He'd finally broken. The cops left. Carol was left standing on her deck, sputtering in impotent rage, the rainbow lights playing across her furious, defeated face. I raised my beer in a silent toast. Checkmate. The great unveiling sent a shockwave through the quiet cul-de-sac, and the first tremor was an email that went out the very next morning from the HOA board. Subject line: Urgent. Emergency meeting regarding unsanctioned structure. 112 Oak Street. They were calling a special session. About my waterfall. I chuckled. It wasn't unsanctioned. It was permitted by the city, and more importantly, it violated exactly 0 of the HOA's ridiculously specific bylaws. I knew this because I had spent 3 hours reading the entire 80-page document, a task more mind-numbing than watching paint dry, but necessary for my defense. The bylaws had rules about fence height, shed colors, lawn ornaments, no gnomes, and satellite dish placement. there was not a single word about 20-foot, RGB lit waterfalls. It was a hilarious oversight. The meeting was held that Tuesday in the clubhouse, a sterile beige room that smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and shattered dreams. The room was packed. It seemed my little construction project had become the must-see drama of the season. The HOA board, a panel of 3 retirees named Stan, Barb, and Jerry, sat at a folding table at the front, looking deeply unhappy. Carol, of course, was given the floor first. She delivered a performance worthy of an Oscar. Her voice quivered with emotion. She spoke of sleepless nights, of a thunderous vortex of noise that had shattered her tranquil existence. She had a poster board with blurry, blown-up photos she'd taken on her phone, which she pointed to with a trembling finger. This monstrosity," she declared, her voice cracking, "is not just an eyesore, it is an attack. An attack on our property values, an attack on our peace, an attack on the very fabric of this community." A few people in the audience nodded sympathetically. Most just looked bored. Then it was my turn. I walked to the front of the room, not with a poster board, but with a slim folder. I was calm, collected, and armed with the most powerful weapon in any suburban conflict: paperwork. "Good evening," I began, addressing the board. "My name is Mark Peterson, and I'm the owner of the monstrosity." A few people chuckled. "I understand there are some concerns, so I'd like to clear a few things up." I opened the folder. First, this is a copy of the building permit, approved and stamped by the City Planning Office. The structure is fully compliant with all municipal codes. I handed a copy to Stan, the board president. "Second," I continued, "I have here a copy of the City Noise Ordinance. As confirmed by police officers who have now visited my property twice, the waterfall's sound, while robust, is within the legal decibel limits for a residential area." I handed another copy to Barb. "And finally," I said, turning a page, "I have a copy of our own HOA bylaws. I've read them thoroughly, and while I now know that my trash cans must be stored out of public view and my holiday decorations cannot be put up before December 1st, there is no mention anywhere in this document of a prohibition on waterfalls." I handed the last copy to Jerry, who looked at it like it was written in a foreign language. I turned to the audience. My previous water feature, a small fountain, was the subject of numerous complaints from Miss Jensen. I tried to compromise. I tried to be reasonable. When that failed, I chose to build something that would bring me joy, something that was my right as a homeowner to build on my own property, and something that was, above all, 100% legal. A voice piped up from the back. It was Tim, my next-door neighbor. "For what it's worth, Stan," he said, addressing the president, "my wife and I think it's great, it's beautiful, and the sound actually drowns out the noise from the highway. Our backyard is more peaceful now than it's ever been." An elderly woman a few rows up chimed in. "Carol reported me last year because my wind chimes were too discordant. I think the waterfall is lovely." The room began to murmur. It turned out that nearly everyone there had a Carol story. A complaint about a basketball hoop, a grievance over a political yard sign left up a day too long, a formal protest about the color of someone's welcome mat. It was a dam of resentment breaking. My waterfall hadn't attacked the fabric of the community. It had accidentally become a rallying cry for everyone who was tired of Carol's reign of petty terror. Stan, the HOA president, looked at Carol, then at me, then at the pile of documents. He looked like a man who just wanted to go home and watch golf. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "it appears that the structure is in compliance. There is no action for the board to take. Meeting adjourned." Carol stared, her face white with shock. She had lost. Her ultimate weapon, the HOA, had declared her powerless. I walked out of that clubhouse feeling 10 feet tall. In the weeks that followed, the waterfall became a local legend. Teenagers would drive down our street at night to see the light show. My property value, according to an estimate I got online out of curiosity, had actually gone up. The house was now listed as having a custom luxury water feature. The white noise was so effective that several neighbors thanked me, claiming they were sleeping better than ever. The waterfall hadn't just been an act of revenge. It had inadvertently improved the neighborhood. It was the most beautiful, thundering irony I had ever seen. The new normal settled in surprisingly quickly. The roar of the waterfall became the new background sound of the neighborhood, a constant, soothing presence that replaced the distant drone of traffic. My backyard was transformed. It was no longer just a manicured lawn, it was a destination. I spent most evenings out there on my deck, just watching the water crash and the lights shift, a cold beer in my hand and a deep sense of satisfaction in my soul. I was the undisputed king of my suburban castle, and my throne overlooked a mighty, color-changing moat. My war with Carol was over. There was no final dramatic confrontation. There were no more letters, no more police visits, no more HOA meetings. There was only a quiet, unspoken truce, a surrender. I saw it happen about a month after the HOA meeting. I was on my deck, enjoying a particularly nice sunset, when I saw a landscaping truck pull into her driveway. For the next 2 days, a team of workers planted a thick, dense wall of 12-foot-tall arborvitae trees along our property line. It was a green curtain, a botanical white flag. She was trying to block the view, but you can't block the sound. I knew, even with a wall of evergreen between us, she could still hear it. The constant, thunderous reminder of her defeat. She would hear it when she woke up. She would hear it when she did her mindful meditation, and she would hear it as she tried to fall asleep at night. The sound she had tried so desperately to silence had become the permanent soundtrack to her life. Sometimes, late at night, I see her silhouette in her upstairs window, looking out over the tops of her new trees, which are bathed in the ambient glow of my lights. There's a sad, defeated slump to her shoulders. On those nights, I almost feel sorry for her. Almost. I took a sip of my beer, the cool mist from the waterfall settling on my face. It's funny. I started this whole journey just wanting a little peace and quiet. A little patch of zen in a chaotic world. It turns out I got exactly what I wanted. I just had to build my peace and quiet a little, louder than everyone else's. I pulled out my phone, a smirk playing on my lips as I looked over at her darkened house. I scrolled through the lighting effects on the app, past calm fade and cool blue. My thumb tapped the screen. For just a moment, a brilliant, flashing, multicolored strobe light erupted in my backyard, a silent, twinkling wink to my vanquished foe. Strobe party, I whispered to myself, before setting it back to a nice, calm purple. Never know when you'll need it.